Hello, everyone. Today is March 18th, and it's my pleasure to be talking to Peter Swanson, whose most current book, seventh novel actually, is called Every Vow You Break. Now, I'm holding up my copy because Peter, and thank you, Peter, has copies that we have sent to him that he's signing and shipping back to us. So please do order an autographed copy. There it is from the Poison Pen. But anyway, I have my advanced reading copy, which I have to tell you, Peter, is a fair treasure right now. They're just beginning to print them again and send them out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have printed innumerable PDFs out that, have watermarks on them or my name on them or things to keep me. I was really amused when I did an event with John Grisham last fall, and I said to the publicist about a month before, I said, it will be helpful if I can read it so I can have a conversation, and the PDF appeared in my mailbox. And I thought, either they're really trusting or they have a system figured out so that I can't auction it off online for
Right. They know who has that PDF or something, watermark or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. So has shipping been off due to everything that's going on in terms of warehouse bookstore shipping and
Well, in before capital B,
Yep.
We did at least 200, sometimes up to 300 events a year, and they were really simple. You would agree to the date with the publicist, and then you would send a purchase order to the warehouse, and one day books appeared, usually before the author appeared. That was good. That was the end of it. So we have done hundreds of Zooms. I'd have to count at least 300. And almost all of them are supported with signed books, which means that time I used to be able to spend reading and talking to you more intelligently about your book because I liked it, I am now spending on the whole supply side. Because everybody's working at home, so there's only, I don't think there are robots in the warehouse, but there are people working there, and bless them, who just get orders. So the publicists and the reps are not in the warehouse. I'm at home. You're there.
Yeah.
You're not used to it. So I have to, first I have to write and say, is it okay if we send them? Then we have to verify your address. Then we have to go through the whole year to get them to you. And then you're a good author, but some other authors have lost the thread. And so they've either given away our books or thought they were their author copies or so. Yeah, who cares about all that really? But it has been a nightmare. But I was interested to see, because we were actually up 8% at the end of 2020 over 2019. And after an analysis, almost 80% of what we sold was a signed hardcover book.
Oh, okay, great. I mean, people are still reading for sure. And I'm glad they're still interested in getting signed copies.
Well, they are, and part of this is, if you look at it as a value sort of proposition, if everybody is paying to have books shipped to them, then they might as well go for something that has a little more significance or a little more value. So the casualty of the pandemic for us, or the paperback sales, and I can tell that because we recently reopened again. I've been trying to get my whole staff vaccinated because I have a lot of senior staff that were at risk. And the paperbacks, once you get people walking in and out of the store, the paperbacks are really turning over again, but they were like dead during.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, it really does. So, I don't know. People are always asking me, what do you see as the future of this? And I think we don't know fully. I think there are a lot of adjustments that we're all going to make. We've been doing virtual events since 1995. Our first one was with PD James. And we have broadcast on Facebook all of our events in the store for years, unless the author had an objection. There were 2 or 3 authors that, didn't want to do that, made them self-conscious or something. So we didn't have to do anything at all except learn Zoom. And it's allowed us, Zoom, to do really spectacular things that we would not have been able, whole assemblages of authors who it would never have been profitable for anyone to bring them all to the Poison Pen.
Yes.
So that's been a great thing. We've also spent a ton of time with international authors. I did a launch for Candace Fox On Tuesday with Adrian McKinney, we did Jane Harper.
Yeah,
You know, I've been all over Iceland and England, and
sure.
yeah, and so we have a big international audience for our virtual events. If you were to look at them, among the thousands, well, you can't really tell, but among the thousands of views, because they have a very long tail. With some authors, very few of the views are from the United States. They're from all over the world. So what is that going to mean for us? You know, I mean, can we monetize that? You know, what do we do? So I'm thinking we're going to be a hybrid, and
Yeah.
um, we will continue to mix virtual events and live events. The other thing we've been doing is trying to focus as much, not focus, trying to support to the huge degree that we can, new authors, because this is such a hard time. And I
Well,
remember
time
your
for new
first
authors,
book,
for sure.
you know, you remember that's how we met when you published.
Well, yes, you were one of my very, very first events for Girl with a Clock for a Heart, book number one. I think maybe you were my second event I ever did as an author, and came out to your beautiful store and had a nice either lunchtime or afternoon event. It was
Yeah.
great.
No, it was wonderful, and it gave us a chance to meet you. And you know, now we get to do a follow-up. Some authors don't like to travel. For example, James Lee Burke, who hasn't traveled for years, we
Okay.
were able to do a virtual event with him this summer. Lee Child, who didn't do a lot of traveling, Lee is on, I mean, like once a month. He's loving hosting authors. So I've seen more of Lee in the last bit with Zoom than we saw for several years. Overseas authors who are not going to get here, or combinations of authors. I was really interested that Karen Slaughter, who's in your same publishing house,
Yes.
asked me to do an event for a friend, an Icelandic author whose books I've read and I really enjoyed. And I said, sure. And it's had almost 10,000 views so far.
Oh, wow.
And only a tiny percentage of them are in the United States. And when we did it, the Facebook comments were from all over the world. You know, Scottish is a huge following in Scotland, but I mean,
Sure.
you know, we've done other ones where people, and we know that people must be up in the middle of the night because we're in one time zone, and then we get a thing from somebody in New Zealand or somebody in Bucharest or, somebody in India or something. And it's all fascinating. So why would we give that up?
Yeah, I don't know. I think everything's going to go to the hybrid model. I think that's going to be the future for kind of everything, because we've all gotten a little bit used to Zoom, and it becomes apparent that there's lots of things you can do with Zoom that you don't need to travel for. So I think we'll go back to a sort of a split model for a lot of things, but definitely for author events.
Well, I think so too. But of course, we miss, having people in the store and all the
Yeah.
energy of it. And different authors react different ways. Some authors love that and some authors do not. So for those that don't, perhaps Zoom will be a better
Yeah.
opportunity for them. And for those that, absolutely love the crowd. I mean, we launched Harlan Coben on Monday, and Harlan,
Yeah, he
really
loves the crowd.
wonderful with crowds. I mean, he's like
Yeah.
a performer. So
He's a
there we are.
performer. Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to talk to you about your new book, Every Vow You Break, and ask you, because obviously your biggest hit so far has been well, certainly in terms of sales here, it was Eight Perfect Murders that
Okay.
came out last March. And do you feel too that was a bigger sales book anyway for you?
Yeah, I think in terms of a more immediate sales, I think my biggest hit, and this is the book I hear most about from readers, is The Kind Worth Killing, which was my second novel. It seems to be the book that continues to get new readers, and people will reach out to me about that book. But in terms of, yeah, I think there was a little bit of a breakthrough on Eight Perfect Murders has done really well. And, it's been out for a year now and people are still responding to me. In terms of business, I kind of don't pay too much attention because I don't get exact sales numbers. I just don't want to know. I prefer to just not know. But I get a sense out there, so I get a sense of what readers are responding to, and yeah, they definitely responded to Eight Perfect Murders.
Why do you think the second book had so much attention? I mean, as I said, I met you for your first one, The Girl with a Clock for a Heart, which I thought was really fascinating. Why do you think the second one is the one that resonates so much?
I think what resonated in that book was kind of my main character, Lily Kintner, who's sort of she's definitely an anti-hero. She's a murderer who has a sort of system whereby she thinks it's okay to kill certain people, and she's not squeamish about this. She's not a serial killer exactly, because she doesn't enjoy killing people. She just doesn't mind killing people. And I think for whatever reason, she just people really liked her character. And I get more emails that sort of all say the same thing, which is essentially, is there something wrong with me that I really liked this character of Lily? Um, also implying, is there something wrong with me that I wrote this character of Lily? But anyway, for whatever reason, that book caught on. I think the books that people love and the books that people don't love are kind of a mystery. If it wasn't a mystery, then we would know how to create a best-selling novel, and we would have a formula. And there isn't a formula. So your job as an author is to write the story that interests you and that you really enjoy telling, and hope that you find readers. I mean, that's kind of all there is to it.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I've been doing this for 31 years and I am still caught by surprise.
Sure.
Every once in a while, you really can't tell ahead of time. And that's one of the real problems is, the supply side and so forth. Sometimes you just can't tell what is going to become an electric book. And, you ordered what you thought was reasonable and you want to shoot yourself that you were short,
Yeah.
or it goes the other way. And it's interesting in the career spans of many authors, the arc of their publication. Some of them are pretty consistent, but some of them really go up and down, and
Yeah.
some of them build. And you're right. There isn't really. I wish there isn't really any way to predict it. I mean, we did. I actually had to talk the publisher into letting us do an event for Where the Crawdads Sing.
Yeah.
I needed it for a first mystery book of the month, the same way that your book, A Girl with a Clock for a Heart, was a first mystery book of the month for us. And I like the eco background. I thought it was an interesting story. But what did I guess that, I mean, if I had, I would have ordered thousands of copies instead of hundreds.
Who would have guessed? And she's been on the top of the bestseller list for, I mean,
Two
years.
and a half years, I think it is. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
it
Who
was an
who would have
August
predicted
book.
that?
Yeah, no, I know it was an August book because, it was so hot in Phoenix. It was basically Delia and me and like three people
Right.
because, it was, but anyway, it's all unpredictable, which makes it fascinating. But that leads me to a question. What is it about the trust no one genre, the psychological suspense thing? What draws you to that?
Well, I think one of the things I like in mystery novels is ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, as opposed to the sort of classic cops and robbers where you have a good guy or a good girl figuring out, um, trying to find out who the bad guy is. Um, I like books that regular people get caught up in crimes, maybe commit a murder, maybe they don't. But I like books in which all the characters are sort of in the gray area, on the line between good and bad. I'm just drawn to that. I also enjoy an occasional really good, cops and robbers book, for lack of a better word. So, but I'm most drawn to novels where anyone could be guilty and everyone is a little bit flawed. So that's just me. That's what I like to read, and I guess that's what I like to write as well.
So when you're writing a book like Imperfect Murders or Every Vow You Break, do you envision the resolution of it before you start writing it, or do you plunge in and let it? This is not really the pantser question, but it seems to me it's hard to get to the end of a trust no one book if you don't know where you're going.
Yeah, I usually have some idea. Now, I don't write it down, so I'm not someone who's outlining and writing it down, but I'm always outlining in my head, in the sense that even though I might be jumping in with a premise, I'm thinking ahead and I'm thinking, what's really going on? What's going on under the surface here? And you kind of need to know. You don't need to know what your protagonist or your good guy is doing, because they're reacting often. But if you don't know what your bad guy is doing, if you don't know what that person is up to, I think you can wind up in trouble in your book, because they're, in a sense, driving the story, right? They're the ones pushing everything that's happening. So I do like to know who my villains are and why and how they got there. Um, and then I can let things sort of fall into, fall in different ways. But I do like to know that.
When you're writing a protagonist that, well, let's take Every Vow You Break. We can't say a lot about it, but at least in the setup, Abigail Baskin, who has snared well, maybe that's not a fair word. Anyway, she's engaged to be married to a super rich tech guy, however that
Yeah.
comes about, which we won't talk about. And she slips up and has I mean, this is all at the beginning, right? So I'm not giving
Yeah.
anything away.
No, you're not giving anything away.
Okay, so she has a one night stand with a guy on kind of on her bachelorette weekend. And immediately now the question is going to be, how is that going to play out? Actually, Joe Finder did something like that. If you remember in a book he wrote about a woman judge who was at a convention in Chicago and had a one night stand,
Okay.
and it followed her. So for those of us who had one night stands and haven't had consequences, I guess it's a good thing on the whole that we've escaped. But let's
You
assume
have something you want to confess to us, Barbara?
come on, I'm 80 years old. My life is littered with
Yeah, with us.
incidents that I might very well have gone badly for me. Let's put it that way. But fortunately, I have escaped. It's interesting, Peter. I think back when I was in high school in the 50s. I graduated from New Trier in Winnetka, Illinois in 1958. And the two biggest risks that you could have as a girl in high school then were either you got pregnant,
Right.
if or maybe you got drunk. But I mean, drugs were like not even in the picture. There was no social media. There was no
Oh, yeah.
um, and it seems those were catastrophic events to face then, but they're nothing now. The opportunities for high school kids to get into trouble, I mean, create huge plots for crime fiction. And I think back to how innocent we were.
Yeah, no, I think times have changed, but I do think that there's always been this situation where, we all make mistakes, and if we're lucky, those mistakes don't haunt us. Um, in this book, and I was really interested in writing this type of novel. I wanted to write frankly, with this new book, I wanted to write what I call a linear thriller, as opposed to the sort of complex. Thrillers that I tend to write, thrillers that have two or three narrative perspectives, or thrillers that have two time periods, the past and the present and how they're affecting each other. I wanted to write a more simplified thriller where someone just makes a mistake and then that mistake haunts them, and it kind of snowballs, so it just gets worse and worse. And what we're doing as a reader is we're right along on that ride with that one protagonist. In other words, we find out everything at the exact moment that that protagonist is finding out. So it's a different type of story than one in which we know multiple perspectives going in, and it's a little more complex. So I think of these as Ira Levin thrillers. I don't know. That's just me. I think of it as sort of like a Rosemary's Baby or a Stepford Wives, just this woman who just gets into this weird situation all of a sudden and can't quite understand it. So that's what I wanted to write. And I love the idea that like one sort of single mistake could open up this world of pain in this case, and that you can't get out of, because I think that's a fear that everyone kind of harbors. What did I just mess up, and what's my life going to be like? And most of us hopefully remain relatively unscathed, although we don't always in the end.
Well, yeah, I think the person who drives drunk and hits somebody, as opposed
Sure.
to the person who's over the limit and makes it home, could
course.
be. Life is full of moments where just one little thing, 1 second
Yes.
even, can turn it around. But when you read a book like Every Vow, the question, I mean, for me, of course, I read this stuff, zillions of them. And so I guess that, it's not as though I read like 2 or 3 books a year. It's like, 2 or 3 books a day sometimes. But I have to sit there and I sit there and I say to myself, okay, so the 3 main characters to keep an eye on. One's Abigail, obviously, because
Yep.
she's the heroine of this book. One is the one night stand who shows up.
Yeah.
And the third is Abigail's fiance. And, you know, there are other characters around, but clearly that trio, something in one or more of them is going to be what the story ends up pivoting around. And if you know it's that kind of book, that's the way you approach it. You know, if it's I have a different mindset when I open up like a police procedural or something, which has an instigating incident, just like your book does. But
Sure.
I know it's going to progress in a different way. It's going to be linear. We're going to be looking at it through the eyes of the person running the case, probably. Although
Yep.
sometimes you wind up with perspectives from you know, the suspects or the main suspect, rarely from the victim. I mean, in theory, the victim is dead. Although I'm doing an event for Dean Koontz next week, and with Dean, you just absolutely never know
Right.
whether, you know, whether the victim is not really dead or whatever it might be.
Anything.
So, you know, I mean, it seems to me that you end up doing a fair amount of cloaking in the sense that you don't want us to know which of these characters is going to turn out to be, or who's going to, how they're going to turn out. So did you come up with all three of them at the beginning, or did you feel your way along? How does it work?
I had a basic, bigger premise in mind, and this is a little bit of a tough book to talk about because
Mhm.
I'm leaving stuff out. But there is a premise at the heart of it, which is, you know, the premise is what if you had this one night stand and then this person, this stranger really to you, follows you on your honeymoon, threatening to, you know, threatening to upset, you know, the apple cart and destroy your marriage. It's fatal attraction, right? It's a gender reverse fatal attraction. But I have there's a sort of another thing going on that I can't really talk about. So I will say that when she gets to the island on which her honeymoon takes place, there are a number of strange events that start happening that don't necessarily seem to have to do with either her husband or the stranger, and they wind up connected. So I hope that's enough of a teaser to say that there's a bigger thing happening. Which, you know, I think most mystery novels should have more than one idea at their heart. You know, it's best when books kind of have a couple different ideas that kind of combine them. You know, because books, unlike short stories or an hour-long TV series, you know, they're a little bit of a commitment. So
Very true. They are a commitment. So, you know, you look at Abigail and you think, you know, why did she do it? Or, you know, we're going to have to pursue that line to figure out why she did
right.
that. And then you have to look at the one night stand and ask what's motivating him to show up. You know, is it obsession? Is it blackmail? Is it whatever? And you know, I think that's interesting because you have to peel back over the course of the book. You have to peel back layers of these people to figure out what they're doing. And, you know, the obvious answer is not necessarily the right answer as you move along.
Yes, let's hope that's the case, that you actually won't guess what's going on. But it's funny that you say, you know, you're talking about, I did think of this as a simpler thriller in the sense that it is a limited number of characters. There's no simple thrillers to write. I mean, as a writer, I thought that it might be easier to write this sort of linear thriller. Structurally, all thrillers are hard to write because you really need to foreshadow and getting your themes and kind of the book needs to work in the beginning for it to work in the end. It's a lot of balls in the air, even if you have a story that feels relatively simple. It's never easy.
Well, no, and of course they're all different kinds of thrillers. You know, I mean they can have different. For some reason or other, the Poison Pen has become like the epicenter of the military thriller. You know, I mean, you know, I mean, when Mark Rainey came out in February, I hooked in. You know, a whole bunch of the guys like Jack Carr and Kyle Mills and whatever, and they're much more straightforward. I mean, they're really more action adventure kind of books, you know, where there's some bad thing going on and there's a guy in a group that are heading in that direction. They're not like spy thrillers where, you
Yeah.
know, that's a whole different question. I mean, Alma Katsu is coming to see us next week with Red Widow, and it's a very Le Carre story. It reminds me a huge amount of you know, one of the George Smiley, the spy that came in from the cold, because you're basically chasing a mole and you don't know who it is. So that is a much different structure than James Reese launched on a mission, you know, to go somewhere. And the psychological thriller is a different breed as well. But I always approach them now with, they're called Trust No One, but I always approach them when I start them about, you know, who's going to be the character that I don't think this person is.
Right.
The author does not want me to think this person is whatever it all is. So let's talk about Eight Perfect Murders, because that's been out a while. So, you know, we don't want to spoil it, but I was pretty sure when I opened it up and read the first bit, who your bookseller really was.
Okay.
Because that was sort of the point of the book, right? It's a bit of an homage to Christie, I think, in some ways.
Right, and I think one of the things, yeah, so it's a book about classic crime, really, and the main character, Malcolm, creates a list of his 8 favorite fictional murders, and then discovers later on through an FBI agent that someone seems to be using those fictional murders to create real murders. So becomes a suspect and becomes a helper in solving of this crime. Because I knew I was delving into sort of golden age and classic crime, I have him sort of say right up front, you know, talk about unreliable narrators. Is he telling you the whole story? Talk about red herrings. There's red herrings. There's clues. There's a real kind of a reveal of the killer. I wanted to do some more of the classic trope stuff that you find in murder mysteries, while also doing a spin on it, kind of a meta version. But yeah, so I did make sure that Malcolm right up front is kind of taunting you with the way that he's going to tell the story, that, you know, maybe I'm going to eventually tell you everything, but I might not tell you everything right away, kind of thing.
In the whole spirit of whether, you know, whether you were going to get me with it not being what I thought it was, which was a lot of fun for me. But I mean, you know, I'm not a real fair reader in the sense that, you know, I have a whole lifetime of reading crime fiction. So I'm not going to be as easily lulled as the average reader. And I try to remember that. The other thing I wanted to ask you, which I think is a very interesting question, is why has the number thing become so important? You know, Stuart Turton's novel, Richard Osman, you know, well, no, that's not a number one, but there was another author right before Richard from Britain, and he had a number in his. And
Eight Perfect Detective. He has, yeah. Well, I have that book somewhere, and I wanted to introduce it. You know, I have a book called Eight Perfect Murders, and then he has a book called 8 Detectives. And I just thought, you know, you should introduce those books together because they'd be perfect for each other.
Well, he was a really nice guy. I did his US launch for him, and right before.
I read that book. It was clever. I liked it. I think the numbers are sort of random, but you know, I struggle with titles. I don't personally struggle. I always think I wrote a great title, and then my editor tells me I didn't, and wants me to come up with a new title, and then we struggle to come up with a new title, and eventually we landed on 8 Perfect Murders, and I thought it was quirky. I mean, I think the number was like, you know, 8 perfect. What's, you know, what's wrong with 1 perfect murder? Why do you need to have 8? So I was hoping it would pique people's interest. And of course, it's the name of the list that Malcolm writes. But I don't know if there's a trend in numbers, but if there is, it might have been started by, is it Leanne Moriarty? She did 9 Strangers or something.
I think I'm trying to remember. Yeah, something like that. But you know, what's really interesting is the introduction of the halves. When Stuart Turton's book came out in the UK, it was called The 7 Deaths of Evelyn. I'm trying to remember the whole title.
Hardcastle.
Thank you. Evelyn Hardcastle. In the US,
they added a half.
They added a half. And I'm thinking back to Juliet Grimes, the Soho editor, who wrote a book that's not really a mystery. But anyway, it was like the 9.5 lives of, or I can't remember the name of the woman, a family sort of a thing. And I'm thinking, okay, numbers kind of set the reader up to expect. If you're calling it 8 Perfect Murders, then the reader from the beginning is looking for a progression. You know that it's not going to be just one murder, or as always seems to happen, if the first murder is so great that nobody can solve it right away, if it's so clever, you almost have to have a second one in order to allow the detective to work out the first one. I mean, if murders just held their nerve, they probably would do a lot better. But
I know, right? We'd have a lot more. I wonder if it has to do with sort of the new, social media and clickbait articles. And they say that, if you publish an article saying, let's talk about the most addictive TV series on Netflix, you get a certain number of clicks. But if you actually title it and go 7 most addictive TV series on Netflix, like you get like double the number of clicks. People want lists of things, so maybe they're trying to capitalize on that. I don't know.
I don't know. I think the half throws in uncertainty.
Yeah,
I mean,
half.
what is the half death of Evelyn Hardcastle?
So
What is the half
was
life?
the American version the 7.5 deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, whereas in the UK it was just the 7 deaths?
Yeah.
Did you ask him about that?
I've done events with Stuart, and I know the publisher, and I think that the thought was at Source Books, it was the U.S. publisher for the Turton, that it added more of a hook.
Yeah, more of a hook.
And I can't disagree with that. But I think it is a bit of a trend, and you've given a good answer. Maybe that is playing into a reason, or it's playing into a desire for lists. But it may also be that people kind of like a little bit of a guide into the book. Okay, I'm opening this book and they're going to be 8 murders.
Right.
I'm going to follow them from A to B to C to D, or 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 or something. And I'd also really, doesn't that suggest a linear progression?
Sure. Yeah, always. I think numbers do, or maybe a book with some logic to it as well.
So your cat is being incredibly well behaved. What have you been doing during the pandemic? Have you been more productive, less productive?
I go up and down. I know that people say the both. I went through a period of distractions where I just felt like between COVID and politics and what was happening in the world at large, I just felt like I was spending my time online, clicking through news stories and feeling I was having a hard time reading and writing. And then I went through a period where I was like, maybe push that aside, and went through a really great period of reading and writing. And of course, all of this happens. This is basically where I do my work, which is on this couch, usually with my cat, Finty, next to me. And, so I'm not going anywhere, but I've had a pretty good year in terms of writing. But I do understand when people felt like, you needed to check the news every hour to see what was happening. None of us need to do that, by the way. We can check the news at the end of the day, but we've forgotten that. So, I'm struggling like everyone, but I have my health, and I'm lucky enough to have a job that I can do from home. And hopefully we're looking at the end of this, the light at the end of the tunnel here with vaccinations, and hopefully.
Other stuff. Well, doom scrolling was hard to resist, especially as we accelerated through fall into January. It was
hard not to doom scroll. Yeah.
No thriller writer could ever have come up with the bizarre scenarios that we actually lived through. So yeah, it was a distraction. But it's interesting. I mean, I've talked to obviously hundreds of writers over this time, and some have really been more productive and taken on projects they didn't think they'd have time to, and others have not felt able to write. And so it's a very personal reaction, which is certainly true for readers as well. Some people have read more, some people couldn't focus, and that's one of the questions that I think about moving forward, is that there's actually been, I think, an acceleration of reading, and part of that is lack of other distractions for our attention. And part of it is a need to escape. Historical fiction, I think, is particularly comforting, and because you know how it came out, you know, a really good thing. But I'm wondering, you know, whether a sort of surge of reading. We sold lots of classics, you know, War and Peace, you know, that nobody ever got around to.
Yeah.
Well, when I say nobody, the people who bought them clearly, you know, hadn't gotten around to them. Will that continue? You know, will people want to make time to read those things that they always meant to read, or are we all going to get distracted again? And, you know, what's the effect of long form television on books? It certainly creates a different dynamic. I mean, I've been in the Outlander bookstore for 30 years. So I do know how that works. But, you know, talking to C.J. Box about his TV, or Mark Rainey has a thing in production, Jack Carr's on the set probably as we speak, working at Michael Connelly, whatever. It does change readers' expectations and demands, I think, when there's a TV franchise compared to, you know, just the books. And I'll be interested to see whether more long form television continues to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think bingeable television is going anywhere. I mean, I think what's going on with people is, maybe even with so much content out there and so many new series coming every week to Hulu and Netflix and Amazon Prime, I think people are still just burning through them and running out. But I do think there is a quality of relaxation and a quality of engagement that you get from reading that you can't get from any other medium. You don't get it from movies, and you don't get it from television. It's a little harder to get into it. To start reading a book is harder than pressing play on your remote and starting your series, because you can kind of veg out and it just flows over you. Whereas you're reading, you have to be a little more active and involved. But I think once you're in it, I think it's the best escapist. It's still the best escapist entertainment we have. To be really in the middle of a book that you love, there's nothing like it. And I like to think that books are not going anywhere, even though, I mean, I love books, and I'm watching all those Netflix thriller shows too, because I like those as well. But at the end of the day, it's the books that I really love. And I think enough people out there like that, you know, the bookstores are going to stay in business. The authors hopefully are going to stay in business. The authors' cats will get fed, and all will be right with the world.
I think, you know, reading is a solipsist activity. Marshall McLuhan had it right. I remember reading The Medium as the Message and whatever else he wrote. And experience a story by reading it is entirely different than viewing it.
Absolutely.
And viewing is very often a group thing. I mean, you know, obviously with long form television, you can do it by yourself, but generally, let's say a movie theater or something, you know, you're not the only person in there. And so you're affected by the emotions and reactions of people around you. Whereas a book, it's all yours. I have marveled at how many people have not found things to do, or have found the pandemic has weighed on them, and they've looked for distractions. I remember reading in some, I don't remember if it was the Times or whatever, about a woman who invested hours in tufting a miniature chair for a little house she was building. And, you know, great, good for her. But I think the world's divided into people who read and people who don't. And people who read are looking for hours of solitude, and people who don't are looking to fill them.
Right.
And, you know, it's a big difference. So being in a bookstore has, or running a bookstore has kept us really with people who read, right? And we don't hear many people complaining that they're bored or whatever it is. Whereas I think away from readers, that's a bigger problem. So I don't know, there are not enough hours in the day for us. I mean, we're just so busy, we can hardly keep up.
Right, and you always have a book to read, so.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're going to see Peter again on May 4th with Linwood Barkley from Canada, still not able to travel, unfortunately. I love Linwood. He's been a writer in residence at the Poison Pen and has come to visit us many times. Unfortunately for him, usually in July, which was
Okay.
like a terrible time. But anyway, he's going to be joining us virtually on March the 4th to launch his new novel, and Peter is going to be the host, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm very much interested in the kinds of questions you will ask Linwood, since I've done it for so many years. I'm perishing to crib off you and find out your approach.
I've already got some doozies. I'll have to yeah, I've been catching up on some of the Linwood books I haven't read, and what a great writer he is, and talk about
He
every
really
book's a
is.
little different.
Yeah, no, he is. I'm always, Linwood has a capacity for surprise, to surprise me anyway, that I
Yeah.
really treasure. And when you talk to him, he doesn't look like the fiendish mind, that's clearly churning inside there. No more do
Yeah.
you. As a matter of fact, I always think it's a lot of fun. It's not like authors are deliberately wearing masks, but there's, it's kind of this facade, and behind it, it's
I'll
all
try
the.
and unmask him in my interview. I'll try and get him to show his real face.
That
My,
sounds great.
my guess is that his real face is a sweet, kind guy, like most mystery writers. Mystery writers are nice groups of people. I mean, they really are. Even
They
if
are.
they're
Yeah,
coming up
and he
with
is a lovely wife, and they've been married forever, and they often travel together. But so maybe she'll be in the background as
All right.
we converse. Peter, it's really been a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much for giving us some time today.
Thank you, Barbara. Great being with you again virtually instead of in person.
Well, I hope you'll come and see us when things go back to before, because it's been a long time since you've been
Yeah.
at the store, and it'd be really nice to have you. So we'll figure something out.
All
Anyway,
right.
enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks
You
very
too.
much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Barbara. Bye.